everyone, welcome back to my channel. We're very lucky today. We're being joined by Dr. Marko, who is the Don of all things medical skin. He is a consultant plastic and reconstructive surgeon, yes?
Yes.
Did I say that right? Oh, good. And a skin cancer specialist. And I don't mean, oh, he's, someone who knows what he's talking about. Yeah, he's really good. He is the man that if you have any kind of issue with your skin, this is where you want to go. And you treat all sorts of people, from NHS patients to your private clients here, and you do jet off occasionally and treat people whose names we would know. Is that a nice way of saying it? A mixed bag. I know you can't say, but it's a mixed bag. So someone,
Patient's confidentiality.
Of course. Okay, so we are going to kick off with your most asked questions from the blog. Thank you so much for all your responses. So let's start from the beginning. Why do we need to wear SPF?
We need SPF because we need to protect the skin from the UV light. We know that UV light is having a bad effect to the skin. We know that it causes sunburn, but it also causes sun damage by damaging the DNA. So we really want to protect the skin and potentially protect the negative effects of the sun, which would be skin aging and skin cancer.
Okay, so there's no getting out of it.
No, absolutely not.
Okay. And what is your biggest bugbear when it comes to SPF? What do you think are the sort of misconceptions? Because I think, despite the fact that it's been around for so long, there's a huge amount of controversy still on certain aspects of SPF. Brands give differing advice. So as a very basic, if you were giving a person in your clinic bottom line advice, where do you start?
Well, it's a good question, because there's so many information on sunscreen and so much confusion at the same time, so many different rules across the globe. FDA standards are completely different from European are different from Australian, and that creates the confusion, particularly nowadays, because people are moving from different places, and they can hear on the internet, they can read different information. As a clinician, it's very interesting, because I was just recently reading a paper showing that in America there was a survey of physicians, and apparently in 0.07% of all visits the word sunscreen was mentioned. Which is just showing, that many doctors are not using the word sunscreen, not advising. And nowadays, as I said previously, we know with no question that UV light is causing skin aging, is causing a break of collagen, is causing also all other things that happen that lead to wrinkly skin and the aging skin. But at the same time, it causes also skin cancer. And it's one of the really important factors in developing skin cancer, both melanoma and non-melanoma.
On that note, I want to clear up something that was a couple of months ago on my Instagram. I put a picture up of your SPF and was just saying, raving about it, which we'll come to. And someone had said that they had precancerous cells that their doctor had said they were going to keep an eye on. Is it my understanding that if you've got precancerous moles, they just need to be off? You're either cancerous or you're not. Can you clear that up? Because I have a lot of people saying, my doctor or my GP says I might have precancerous moles. And my thinking is, surely if there's an inkling that it could be, you just whip it off.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. It's like that. If you look at the mole, it's like the mole is a benign lesion. But if you have a mole that is changing and showing any signs of a change in terms of asymmetric, with irregular borders, with a color change, a diameter of over 6 millimeters, and there is a constant change in the looking of that mole over the period of time, that's all indicate that that mole needs to go off.
Yeah, just get rid.
So just get rid of that mole.
Thank you. So what is the difference between physical and chemical SPF?
But this is a very common question actually. When I was looking at all your questions, many people were asking, should I use the physical or should I use the chemical? Let's say first of all that chemical sunscreens act in a completely different way from physical sunscreens. Physical sunscreens are reflecting the light while chemical sunscreen are absorbing the UV light. That's the major difference.
So, to the uninitiated, there are hundreds of sun products available. What should we use, chemical or physical? And, I'm going to bombard you here, does it change depending on your age and skin tone or skin colour?
Well, it's a matter of choice. Both are valid. I would say physical sunscreens are valid the same way like chemical sunscreen. Unfortunately, in the recent years, we were bombarded by the people saying, oh, you need to use the physical sunscreen because it's natural. It's not true. It's a completely inaccurate statement. I would say that both are having pro and contra. Using chemical sunscreen, the major defect of a chemical sunscreen is the fact that it is absorbed by the skin. Physical sunscreen is not absorbed by the skin and it stays on the skin, but also the bad side of that is that it usually leaves a very white residual on the skin. And it's not very pleasant. So sensorial aspect of a physical sunblock is not as good as the sensorial of a chemical one. On the other hand, I must say I was reading a lot in the recent years, particularly from different bloggers, different people who are talking about the sunscreens, and they say it's safe to use only physical sunblock. This is again a complete dogma. So
it's not completely safe to only use physical sunblock?
No, not what I'm saying basically is that people say chemical sunscreen equal non-safe because it's chemical.
Oh, okay.
Physical, it's safe because it's natural.
Right.
But actually it's not true because recent studies are showing in zinc oxide, for example, which is the most commonly used, is very toxic for the fish and aquatic world.
Mm-hmm.
And
where do we use it? On the beach.
And we're using on the beach. And obviously, I wouldn't personally use it. But then there's another also issue. If you want to get rid of that kind of a white film that is created by the physical sunscreen, then you need to create the formula using nano versions of zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. And nanotechnology is seriously discussed nowadays.
Yeah.
Is it safe or not? So again, I would say, yes, you have seriously to consider whether you want to use a chemical sunscreen with the possibility that some of sun filters and sunscreens will be absorbed by the skin and might have a potential irritation, cause irritation or allergic reaction, or you may prefer to use physical sunscreen where there is always a risk. Titanium dioxide nowadays is considered by the International Agency on Cancer Research that it may cause the cancer as well, cancerogenic effect. So, it's a very confusing for the people to decide what.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go into some questions. The most popular question easily was, and I'm not going to jump in with any of my responses, I'll just give you my feedback from what I've had response. This is all your show because I want it to be, this is the bottom line, When you wear 3 different items that have SPF, do you accumulate the SPF or is it only as good as the highest SPF? So if you're wearing a moisturizer that contains SPF 15, a tinted moisturizer that contains SPF 30, and a sunscreen somewhere else, because we have been asked this question, do you then technically have an SPF of 65 or do you only have whatever the highest SPF is?
Now, I can't give you exact answer to that question because it's not so easy.
Okay.
It depends on so many factors. First of all, what kind of sunscreens you used. It's like, if you use a chemical or physical sunblock, and what's happened? Did they went to the skin or not? How much of the sunscreen have been absorbed? What you're applying on the top? Is there any interaction between those that you apply first and those that you will apply in the second round or a third round? So it's very difficult to say. You're getting certainly some protection, but what kind of protection? Whether you're getting protection from the first sunscreen that you apply or the last one, it's very hard to determine.
So there's no
it's really depending on so many factors.
Interesting. So I'm asked a lot about different age groups and different skin colourings. So if we just do a brief overview of what you would recommend, and I know there's going to be, I think there might be some legalities for you, I could be wrong, but I sense there might be some things you have to be careful what you say. But if I came to you with a baby and said, Dr. Lenz, what would you recommend I put on my baby? Obviously, I'm going to try my best to keep them out of the sun, but for example, when I was pushing my babies in the pram, doesn't matter how much you cover them up, they will kick everything off, and they might have a head and a hat on, but the legs will be out. So what would you, if you had a baby, in your opinion, what would you use?
First of all, let's start from the fact that everyone needs to use the sunscreen.
Okay.
And people very often think, I have a dark skin or I have a black skin, I don't need a sunscreen, which is wrong. They need a sunscreen. Now, obviously, their skin is not as vulnerable to the UV light as ours. It's a very pale skin.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you have a very pale skin, you need more protection. You definitely need to take more care. But said that, also people who have dark skin, they need to use the sunscreen. Regarding the kids, I think a very important aspect is actually to change their behavior. So they need to, first of all, wear long sleeves, hats, be protected, and obviously you shouldn't expose your child at the sun between 4 in the afternoon, because that's where the sun is the strongest one, and it will cause a lot of damage. Now the question, if I would have a child, what kind of sunscreen I would put on my child? I would probably put a chemical sunscreen on my child. But there is also a reason. Again, I don't like the nanotechnology, and I wouldn't feel safe about nanotechnology. And if I have to go with a physical sunblock, then it's almost like a white paste that no one likes to have in the face.
I can tell you from experience, there is nothing harder than chasing a child around a beach and trying to cover them in white goop.
And in fact, if you look, the compliance in using the sunscreen is extremely important. Why do people don't use so much sunscreen? Because the sunscreen are not used because they are not nice. They don't feel good on the skin. So if I don't feel good, it's like with those sunscreen, I might use once, twice, and then I'm leaving it. I'm not using it. So this sensorial aspect is extremely important.
So pick a sunscreen that you like the feel of and you like the smell of, otherwise you're not going to use it and you're going to burn.
I absolutely agree with you.
Okay. Yes. And then for skin types, i.e. the biggest question is people with acne. Because a lot of people with acne say that sunscreen breaks them out, and obviously they have a problem washing it off because it can really irritate the skin. And I know that when I had my outbreak of adult acne at about 40, the sun healed it. And I know that that's really controversial and awkward to say, and I've said it to sort of, clients who come to see me for skin consults. I can only speak from my experience, and obviously I wasn't crazy and out there like this, but I know that if I had been out in the sun during the day, wearing my normal makeup SPF, not a sophisticated SPF 50 or anything like that, my skin was better at the end of the day. Is that me being crazy? Or is there a balance?
The sun should dry, actually. The sun is dry, having a drying effect, so many of the acne should disappear. The problem is not the sunscreen itself. The problem are the components that are going in formulation, because there's so many components that you're putting in a sunscreen. And depending on those components will depend whether those will be comedogenic or not. So those could cause potentially acne or not.
So what do
For
you
example,
avoid?
you should avoid anything. I mean, first of all, I always recommend to use the oil-free sunscreen.
Okay.
It feels better, it's less greasy, it doesn't cause perspiration, it will most likely not cause any breakouts, and you should avoid oils. Mineral oils, if you see anywhere written mineral oil, avoid. I mean, one of the things that people like to put is a paraffin. Paraffin or liquid mineral oil. It's kind of a posh paraffin, I would say nowadays.
The medical grade.
It's used in a lot of cleansing products, and recently, in the recent years, we saw a big boom in products containing liquid paraffin, which, as I said before, I call a posh mineral oil. It's a disaster for the skin. It dries the skin, it clogs the pores, and it's a perfect triggering factor to cause acne. On the other hand, when you mix it with sunscreens, it could also cause degradation of the sunscreen.
So it could degrade the sunscreen.
Exactly. So the product like that you should avoid.
Okay, so we're going to avoid products with mineral oil, especially if we're acneic, and the possibility that it could degrade the SPF factor. Going on to that, then another frequently asked question is, when do you apply your SPF? Do you apply it straight away on naked skin before you apply your serum and moisturizer and everything else? Because to my mind, nothing would penetrate. What would be the point? Maybe I'm wrong. Or do you do cleanse, tone, whatever, serum, moisturizer, and SPF?
SPF should be actually the last product that you apply product that you apply in your skincare regime. So you wash, you exfoliate, you put your serum, you put your moisturizer, you wait that all of that is absorbed, and you put the sunscreen.
Okay.
But said that, the most important is how do you use the properly sunscreen, and what is the proper amount of sunscreen. First of all, you should put the sunscreen at least 15 to 20 minutes before you go to the sun. And what is the right amount? The right amount would be 2 milligrams per square centimeter.
Which on the body, talking about tablespoons, is...
But let's think about the teaspoon. And if we're talking about a teaspoon for the face and neck, you would need 1 teaspoon of a sunscreen to cover face and neck. Obviously, you know, for the chest and for the back, you would need 2. For each arm and forearm, you need 1. And for each leg, back and front, you would need 2 teaspoons. People very often forget to put a sunscreen on the hands, and in fact, as a clinician, I'm seeing so many ladies who are having with the dark spots. Why? Because they were exposed to the sun and they were never protected.
Washed their hands and didn't reapply.
They never protected the sunscreen.
And it's teaspoons, not tablespoons.
It's a teaspoon.
Okay, just to be clear. And for people who aren't too sure, another frequently asked question is it better to have a moisturizer? Is it possible to have an anti-aging moisturizer that also has an SPF? Because I've sort of said on the blog, it must cancel each other out. They do different things. Surely it can't be as anti-aging if it has SPF. And I know from your range in particular, you've done anti-aging moisturizers and a separate SPF. Is that the way you think it should go?
Formulation of a good anti-aging cream is not easy if you want to add sunscreens. The moment you add the sunscreens, you have to sacrifice on some other features like a moisturizing effect or lifting effect or anti-wrinkle effect.
They do different things.
They do different things. So it's like, and I think, it's like, it's very difficult to achieve the sunscreen that will have an efficacy that you want to achieve. Therefore, I like actually that you use your anti-aging product before, and at the end you put your sunscreen. Now, even nowadays, sunscreens change. This whole sunscreen technology started to change. At the beginning, people were putting just the sunscreen. Nowadays, they put antioxidant to boost the activity of sunscreen, so you want to eliminate these dangerous free radicals, and you put different antioxidants. And very often nowadays, in a good sunscreen, you're putting also ingredients that could possibly repair the damage caused by the UV light.
At the same time?
At the same time.
Oh, okay.
So you get, in a way, protection and repair, and this is the way, you know, how I think a modern sun technology should go.
The way forward. Yeah. So protect and repair the damage
Protect
you've already done. On that question, in the 1980s, when some of us were around, there was a big sunbed boom. And I was guilty of being heavily on the sunbeds. Well, as much as you can when you're a teenager. I wasn't on them every day, but you know, they were a popular thing. Everyone did it. My mother, as you know, has had melanoma in her leg. She had to have that removed. She's got a sort of chunk, you know, and that, I think that came directly from stress and sunbed use. It was in the 80s. What about someone like me, who now is much more clued up about the effects of the sun, and you know, I use a lot of fake tan and things like that, but I do still love the sun. But previously I know I've behaved erratically and irresponsibly. Will that damage come to bite me in the butt in 20 years' time?
It will, because we know nowadays that majority of the sun damage happens with the first 20 years of your life.
I knew you were going to say that.
So basically,
and I grew up in the south in America, so
basically, you know, it's like you did. That's the reason why I was saying before, you know, it's easy now, you're a grown-up person, you know about the dangerous effect of the sun, and now you could prevent so many things, but as a kid you don't know. That's why I'm insisting that changing behavior of the kids. It's easy if the parents want their kids to obey to certain rules.
And is there too much cover-up? So, you know, there's lots of stories about we're having a generation, especially in Australia, of children that have rickets, or they, you know, they're going to not have the benefits of the sun, i.e. vitamin D and D3 as they get older. You know, can you cover them up too much? Because, you know, like I said, I like to think that the sun is very healing when you're respectful of it. You know, for example, yogis have been doing sun salutations for thousands and thousands of years, I think, for a reason. Can you use the sun as your friend and be clever with it without putting yourself at risk? If that makes sense.
I mean, sun has been used for many years as a healing agent. And no question, you know, when you expose yourself to the sun and you feel warmness and you feel better, simply because there's no question that the levels of beta endorphins are going up and you feel more relaxed, more happy. And then the sun is also having some positive effects. One of the most important things is actually that we need the sun in order to produce the vitamin D, because vitamin D is produced in the skin, and we need to expose the skin to the UV light. In the recent years, we noticed that we really need to have a sufficient level of vitamin D in order to avoid not only certain type of cancer, but many other degenerative diseases. And now there's a large controversial issue is, should we stay in the sun unprotected for a certain amount of time a day so that we can allow the production of vitamin D, or should we completely stay away from the sun? Many dermatologists nowadays are advising actually to their patients to take like 10 minutes exposure to the sun to boost the vitamin D levels.
Is that enough in your opinion?
Yes, it's in a normal environment. Yes, I think it would be enough to boost the levels of vitamin D in a person.
What about someone who's really dark-skinned or Afro-Caribbean? Because one of the ladies who came to see me was so deficient in vitamin D that she was on a prescription of 25,000 milligrams a day from her GP. So obviously severe, and I know that's an extreme, but there's a lot of readers who, you know, have that concern. What about people with much darker skin? How much can they safely spend in the sun?
Well, you know, there's no safe term. There's no. I mean, people very often. I mean, it's interesting. The ladies coming to my office and say, you know, I didn't burn, I have a safe tan. There's no safe tan.
Yeah.
The moment you have a tan,
change color.
You have a tan, you have a DNA damage. So you already did the damage, you know, and tanning actually happened because that's the way how your body reacted, tried to protect you, because what's happening, you know, is you were on a holiday for 7 days, you know, in a week, and obviously you were exposed to the UVA and UVB light. As a result of exposure to UVB light, you got darkening, you got tanning, because you got a new production of a new melanin, an increased melanin production to protect your skin against exposure to the UVB light. But the damage has been done.
There's no safe tan.
There's no
There's
safe
a fake tan. So fake tan, and enough.
Fake tan is different, but the safe tan is
so
completely
safe tan is a fake tan. A strange question that is very confusing to people who don't really know about it, and from being in the industry, I know that, like you said earlier, the laws between Australia in particular, the USA, so the FDA and the EU, are all completely different. So God help anyone trying to sell across all 3 continents, that's all I can say. But talk to me about PPD, because it's come up a few times, and it's my understanding that PPD is in the EU.
Should we start first with SPF? Well, I don't know whether you readers understand the meaning of SPF.
Okay, go for it.
SPF is, let's say that SPF is a standard method that we're using to measure the efficacy of the sunscreen. SPF is a sun protection factor, and it refers only to the protection against the UVB light. So basically, and UVB light is responsible for the sunburn. So SPF is telling us actually how much more time we can stay on the sun without getting a sunburn.
So UVB is burn, B burn.
Exactly. So if, for example, if you have a sunscreen which is having SPF 15 and you burn usually within 10 minutes upon exposure to the sun, by applying sunscreen of SPF 15, you could stay 15 times more in the sun without getting a sunburn, which is
assuming you don't go swimming.
150 minutes, assuming that you don't swim and all that. So that's SPF. Now, many companies are not using SPF because they think, first of all, of course, you mentioned before in the different countries. In the US, you need to label everything with SPF because that's FDA requirement, because it's a drug. The sunscreen is a drug. While in Europe, it's a cosmetic, and you can claim SPF if you want, but you don't have to put the SPF factor. Right. It's just a guideline which tells if you have a sunscreen.
That's typical European, isn't it?
You should put SPF. Many people are not using the SPF. They're not putting SPF because they think it's not necessary. I think from a practical point of view, I think it's give us a very good idea what's happening on a UVB level, but it doesn't tell us anything about a UVA light and a protection against the UV light. And that's the reason why we have this PPD. So PPD is abbreviation for persistent pigment darkening.
Okay.
And for many years in Europe, people were using PPD as a test to measure how much time or how much more you can expose yourself to UVA light without having a dangerous effect to the UVA light. But the biggest problem with the with this test with PPD is that it's done in vivo. It's basically you apply the sunscreen, then you need to expose the volunteer to the UV light, and the amount of the UV light that you use, it's very, very high. It's almost like being almost 40 minutes on the sun around midday. And that seriously affects the photostability of the sunscreen. On the other hand, it's not done in people who are type 1, who are having type 1 skin, and these people are really mostly affected.
Type 1 is
very pale skin, which is really vulnerable to the sun. So that's the reason why nowadays PPD is not used anymore. There is an alternative of PPD used in Japan and in Asia called PA factor, where you could probably saw on some of the labels of some of these. It's like written PA and then plus up to 4 pluses. But again, it's both PPD and PA are prohibited in the US. You're not allowed to use them. In Europe, you could use them, but actually the latest guidelines showing that in Europe you should use 2 tests. It's a protection factor against the UVA light, and also so-called critical wavelengths. Basically, it's in vitro test, and by this in vitro test, you measure the absorbance of the UV light, and critical wavelengths is defined as the wavelengths below which 90% of the UV light is absorbed. Ideally, you would like to have a critical wavelength which is above 370 nanometers.
How does that make sense to anyone when they're looking at packaging?
It doesn't mean anything, but basically in Europe and in America, if you want to use the broad spectrum claim, which is the claim to cover both UVA and UVB light, you should have the critical wavelengths of above 370 nanometers done in the test, and also your UVA protection should be at least a third of an SPF factor. In other words, if you have an SPF factor of 30, you should have a protection factor, UVA PF protection factor of 10, minimum 10. Do you want me to ask you the question?
Which one?
After all, Caroline, how will you pick up the product?
Well, which one would I go for?